third installment, we're now going to go through the hormones again and the systems again, like the RAA system, ADH, sympathetic nervous system. And instead of addressing how they are going to change the blood, that change the plasma, we're going to address what the urine would be like when these systems are engaged. And these systems are going to help you form urine that has different composition, different concentrations, and even different amounts. If you're forming a scant, highly concentrated urine, that reflects your body trying to save as much water within the body to help bring blood pressure back up to normal. If you are producing copious amounts of dilute urine, this reflects the body trying to get rid of extra water and maybe even extra salts. So again, more concentrated urine means your body is trying to increase water reabsorption. If you're forming copious amounts of dilute urine, that reflects your body trying to decrease water reabsorption. The maximum we can concentrate our urine is a reflection of the maximum we can concentrate our interstitial gradient, the interstitial area around the nephrons. Because of the thick ascending limb, most of our cortical nephrons, of course, have short, thick ascending limbs. The maximum protein machinery that we have available means that we can only concentrate our interstitial gradient to about 1200 milliosmol. And that is the maximum we can concentrate our urine. That would give a urine of a specific gravity of around 1.030. We can produce copious amounts of dilute urine in striking contrast, and we can get that urine to have an osmolality of as little as 30 milliosmol, with a urine-specific gravity very, very close to water, 1.003. Look at this picture of different types of urine. Which urine do you think is being produced by a person whose body wants to reabsorb as much water as possible? Did you pick the right test tube? Then you're correct. That shows a urine that is highly concentrated. What about a person whose body is trying to make or is trying to get rid of extra water? Then you should pick the test tube on the left. It looks very water-like. So the minimum amount of water that can be excreted in order to get the waste products out of your body is called obligatory water loss. Every day we have about 600 milliosmoles worth of solutes that we need to get out of the body. The urine needs to have enough water to get those osmoles out of your body. So let's look at how much obligatory water loss we're talking about. We've seen this equation before. We can calculate excretion by taking the urine flow, which is the V with the dot over it, times the urine concentration of any solute we're interested in. So if the minimum osmolarity we can create is 30 milliosmol, and we have to excrete 600 milliosmoles of waste products every day, then if I take my urine output divided by of 6 milliosmoles per day divided by the minimum osmolarity possible, which is 30 milliosmol, then that means I have to have a urine output of 20 liters per day. I've merely rearranged this equation to solve for urine flow. If the maximum I can concentrate my urine is 1200 milliosmol, and I still need to get those 600 milliosmoles out of my body every day, then the minimum amount of urine I can produce is a half a liter a day. And that's making a highly concentrated urine, the most concentrated urine I can make. So our urinary output per day can be as high as 20 liters, and that would reflect a urine that is very dilute but copious in amount, to half a liter a day, which is about roughly the amount of water in your typical water bottle that you might buy from the grocery store. That would be your most highly concentrated scant urine. There is a famous poem called The Rime of the Ancient Mariner, and in this poem, it's really a poem, It's about a person who's trying to get himself to a wedding reception, and he just wants to get to the wedding reception and have some fun. But along the way, he comes across a sailor, and he basically tells the guy, "Hey, do you want to hear about my adventures?" And the guy politely says at first, "No, I have to get to this wedding reception." But the sailor starts talking about all of these woes that they went through. They got stuck in the doldrums. And the doldrums is an area in the ocean where there's no oceanic currents, there's no wind to inflate their sails, so they got stuck out at sea waiting for the winds to pick up. And they went through their provisions, and at one point the author talks about water, water everywhere, nor any drop to drink, reflecting the idea that these sailors were stuck out in the ocean, surrounded by a lot of water, but they knew they cannot drink it. Now let's talk about the osmolarity of seawater. Depending on where you are, seawater can be about 2,000 to 2,400 milliosmolal. If I stick with 2,400 milliosmolal, that's 8 times the concentration of your plasma. Let's say you decide that you're going to drink 1 liter of seawater. If you consume 1 liter of seawater, that means you consume 2,400 milliosmoles worth of salts. Your blood plasma is now going to have a higher osmolarity because you're going to absorb all of those sea salts. The maximum you can concentrate your urine, remember, is 1,200 milliosmolal. And don't forget, through your normal metabolism, you still have 600 milliosmoles from your own metabolism that you must excrete. So now you've got the 2,400 that you've absorbed from the seawater, plus the 600 milliosmoles of your own metabolism. But the maximum you can concentrate that is 1,200 milliosmoles. That brings us 3,000 milliosmoles because of the 2,400 milliosmoles you drank, plus the 600 from metabolism, divided by 1,200 milliosmolal. That's the maximum you can concentrate your urine. And that means you have obligatory water loss of 2.5 liters. Now, how much water did you drink? 1 liter. That means you're going to have a net loss of 1.5 liters. That means you're going to become severely dehydrated very, very quickly. And do you know that magnesium is one of the most abundant electrolytes found in seawater? And that's going to lead to extreme diarrhea. Not a good idea. What about drinking your own urine? Maybe this seems like it's a good idea. Well, by the time you think drinking your own urine is a good idea, it's probably as concentrated as you can get it to be. So let's say you drink your highly concentrated urine. Let's say by the time you start collecting it to drink it, you're already at that 0.5 liter of urine output. So you consume your 0.5 liter of urine that's already as maximally concentrated. You are now consuming back the 600 milliosmoles that you need to get rid of per day. So you consume those 600 back, but the next day you still have 600 more you have to get rid of, plus the 600 that you consumed right back into your body. That means now you have 1,200 milliosmoles worth of waste product you now need to get rid of, divided by the maximum you can concentrate your urine. That means you're going to produce 1 liter worth of obligatory urine loss. Now that's a 0.5 liter more than what you consumed. You can easily see that you are not winning this battle. You are going to slowly dehydrate yourself. Slower than drinking seawater, of course, but you're still going to lose this battle. Hey, Bear Grylls, do you really think you should be drinking your urine? How do you make a hyperosmotic urine? And what does that mean? That means highly concentrated scant urine. How can your kidney do this? What determines how concentrated your urine can be? Well, first of all, number 1, you need a good interstitial gradient. Because most of our nephrons are cortical nephrons, the maximum we can concentrate our interstitial gradient and you did a physio-X on this, is 1200 milliosmol. If and when ADH is present, then the collecting ducts and medullary ducts then insert aquaporins. When the aquaporins are inserted, as I showed you in a previous segment, then the water moves from the filtrate through the cells attracted to the very salty interstitial gradient through osmotic pressure. The very interstitial gradient is creating this osmotic pressure, and as the water flows into the interstitial gradient, we run the risk of losing the gradient itself. At the same time that ADH causes insertion of aquaporins, it also causes the insertion of urea transporters. And the urea is also reabsorbed with the water, and this helps to maintain the salty interstitial gradient so that you can keep removing water, pulling it into the interstitial space, which will then go into the vasa recta or peritubular capillary beds, and by the time the urine leaves the medullary duct, it is as concentrated as your interstitial space. So let's say you're out in the desert, you're becoming parched, you're at a water deficit. As you dehydrate, your extracellular osmolarity, that's the osmolarity of your plasma, increases. This stimulates osmoreceptors that are found in the hypothalamus. This increased blood osmolarity is the #1 stimulus for the hypothalamus to release ADH through the posterior pituitary. When the osmoreceptors are also stimulated by the high blood osmolarity, this will also lead to a huge increase in thirst. You will seek out water. As your plasma ADH goes up, then the collecting tubules, collecting ducts, medullary ducts, they will insert aquaporins, and this means increased water permeability. This means more water reabsorption. As you reabsorb more water, your blood osmolality will decrease, your plasma volume will increase. Because you're reabsorbing more water, this will mean less water is going out in your urine, and you are producing a scant, highly concentrated urine. With a lot of ADH around, we can create a highly concentrated scant urine, much like the one shown in the test tube on the right. Again, in order for this to happen, we need two things. We need a very good interstitial gradient set up by the thick ascending limb, and number two, we need ADH around. With ADH around, we get aquaporins inserted, and we get more water reabsorption, and we also get urea transporters inserted, and we get more urea reabsorption into the interstitial space to maintain the salt gradient. What can happen if you have inappropriate amounts of ADH? This is called syndrome of inappropriate ADH, but it doesn't tell you how it's inappropriate. Is it too much or is it too little ADH? I remember this. SIADH means syndrome of inappropriate ADH. I remember the first letter and the last letter, SH, and that tells me so high. So SIADH is really, really high ADH levels. If the ADH levels are high and not appropriately regulated, maybe the person has had a head injury and we get too much release by the hypothalamus through the posterior pituitary, or maybe there's a tumor. Of all places in the lung, this cancerous tumor can lead to it producing ADH. I know that sounds weird, but tumors have a way of assuming inappropriate roles in the body. So if you have unregulated extreme release of ADH, you're going to always produce a urine that is highly concentrated, very scant. And your blood plasma is going to be very, very dilute because you're reabsorbing more water than probably the body needs. So your plasma osmolarity will be low. We can give demaclocycline, which inhibits the ADH activity in the kidney. This drug basically is going to block ADH receptors, and so the nephron cells will be less responsive to the high levels of ADH. Now, how can you produce a hypoosmotic urine? How can you make copious amounts of dilute urine? Well, one, you need to shut down the release of ADH. So when this happens, maybe it's because you've consumed too much water and your blood osmolarity is dropping too much. Now, just like high blood osmolarity was the trigger for more ADH release, low plasma osmolarity will be the trigger to shut down ADH release. So the hypothalamus is going to inhibit further release of ADH as ADH levels decline in the blood. That means the collecting ducts and medullary ducts will no longer have their aquaporins inserted. Those areas of the nephron will not reabsorb as much water. It'll stay in the filtrate, and that means your urine is going to have a decreased concentration, a decreased osmolarity. You're going to produce copious amounts of dilute urine. And this means your blood plasma now, its osmolarity will increase back up towards normal. Here's how ADH works. ADH, shown on the right side of your screen, binds to receptors that are through the cell membrane. ADH is not a steroid, so its receptors are on the cellular membrane, not within the cell. It's going to use second messenger systems, and it happens to use cyclic AMP. I'm not going to go through the cyclic AMP second messenger system, but you should know that ultimately the second messenger systems all result in a kinase, and this means that proteins are going to be phosphorylated. And when proteins are phosphorylated, we have a change in the protein physiology. Shown here, you're seeing protein phosphorylation leading to changes in gene expression, and we get more aquaporin synthesis. Additionally, the aquaporins become phosphorylated when they're in the vesicle, and this will stimulate the vesicles to insert the aquaporins into the apical and basolateral membranes. That's how we get increased water permeability by the collecting duct and medullary duct cells. Just like we had a syndrome of inappropriate ADH where there was too much ADH being released, we can have a problem with too little ADH. This is called diabetes insipidus, and it translates into bland urine of high flow. This is not a sugar problem. That's why bland urine is part of this diseased name. It's not a pancreatic issue. What happens with diabetes insipidus is you can have either central diabetes insipidus or nephrogenic diabetes insipidus. In central diabetes insipidus, maybe from a head injury, the hypothalamus loses the ability to either make or release ADH. Therefore, the collecting duct and medullary ducts are not going to have permeability to water because there isn't ADH being made or released. In this case, we can give someone a synthetic ADH. We can give them the 1-deamino 8-D-arginine vasopressin. It's a synthetic ADH. ADH used to be called vasopressin. So if you read vasopressin, it means ADH. Nephrogenic diabetes insipidus means the person can make ADH, but they are not responding to it. Maybe they don't have functional receptors on the collecting duct and medullary duct. So even though the person may have high plasma ADH, the collecting duct and medullary duct are still not reacting to it. In this case, we would have to give the person thiazide diuretics. That may not seem to be intuitive. If we think about the inability to make or respond to ADH, what kind of urine will the person have? What kind of plasma osmolality will they have? What signs and symptoms will they exhibit? Well, first of all, if you can't make or respond to ADH, then your collecting ducts and medullary ducts will remain impermeable to water. And that means you can't reabsorb water during a time when you might need it. This means you're going to have polyuria, which means a high urine output of dilute urine, so low urine osmolality. And it means that your blood plasma is going to be very, very concentrated, a high osmolality, because you're not able to dilute it. You're not able to reabsorb the water that you need. And as your blood osmolality goes up, you know that's the number one thing that should drive more release of ADH. But if the person doesn't have the ability to make it or release it, it's all for naught. But the person will have high thirst, because high blood osmolality triggers the hypothalamus to also instigate the thirst response. So the person is going to have polydipsia. That's the proper term for high thirst. I think of a ladle dipping into water and the person drinking over and over, polydipsia. Now, why the thiazide for the nephrogenic diabetes insipidus? Well, if the person has high blood plasma osmolality, that means too much salt. And thiazide diuretics, you will learn in a later segment, leads to more salt being left in the filtrate. So it's a way to get rid of the salt along with the water that's leaving the person, so that the blood plasma osmolality can return back down toward a normal 300 milliosmolal. In our next segment, I'm going to continue, and we're going to address how these mechanisms like ADH, aldosterone regulate salt balance. We've been talking about regulation of blood pressure in our first two installments. Now we addressed how those hormones are going to affect your urine, especially ADH. And in our next installment, we're going to address maintaining salt and potassium balance.